This is the Tree of Life, Season 25, Chapter 8. In this episode, we will be discussing how infinite recursion produces consensus shifts by dialectical degeneration along a historical narrative. Within a substitution event, in the absence of infinite recursion, we see weak phase linking terminating the event by the compelling of acquiescence. But infinite recursion, with manifold nested substitution events, descending paths, flowing from the initial negation, sees a similar shift to acquiescence, beginning with the most convoluted and ascending to the least. This weak phase linking happens at the boundary of the bubble universe, ascending up away from the infinite recursive paths as each reaches acquiescence. Thus, infinite recursion sees the shifting of consensus by a reflection of the dialectical degeneration in the exterior reality. Now, how does this dialectical degeneration manifest in the external reality? Smaller conflicts between individuals or groups of people are mediated by a decision maker through sequential substitution. In this way, each position in the conflict is reflected in a substitutionary impulse within the analog transitionary structure. As the decision maker decides between the two exclusive sets, described by the digital structure, at the beginning of the sequential substitution event and the one at the end, we see the compelling of acquiescence in the subject according to the determined set. But conflicts about what is true, consensus, don't merely disappear because the decision maker compels acquiescence. They exist under the surface, within the dialectical progression of the actions of the subject. These conflicts may manifest in the occasions where the subject negates or acquiesces. Thus, resolution of conflict requires constant maintenance. Larger conflicts about what is true produce larger hierarchies. These hierarchies compel acquiescence and restrict the negation of any subject by imposing a context length. From this we can see that when a subject experiences infinite recursion, the dialectical degeneration, which it represents, is resolved by way of the compelling of acquiescence in each of those nested substitution events. This weak phase linking reflects shifts, which pass beyond the boundary of the bubble universe, through the causal reordering at the conclusion of the substitution event. Now, how does this occur? Acquiescence typically flows from the impulse, which is negated at the beginning of any substitution event. Thus, each nested substitution event with an infinite recursion reflects a distinct negated impulse. But the initial impulse, which produces infinite recursion, is described outside the bubble universe. It is pre-recursion. This means that the initial impulse, which is negated, becomes the focus of acquiescence in terminating infinite recursion. But the deeper impulses, beyond the pre-recursion impulse, will by necessity reflect some corollary beyond the boundary, subject to affirmation by weak phase linking. Thus, through infinite recursion, we see an active participation in historical conflicts over what is true. This means, for example, that the product of sublimation, the artifact of infinite recursion, will degenerate within the external world according to these historical conflicts. The process by which the artifact is resolved within the external world is the following. First, there is the negation which leads to infinite recursion, that is, each negation leads to descending convoluted paths, which each lead to more paths and more negation. During the substitution event, the subject sublimates, then verbalizes. All of the aspects of that artifact must be classified, generalized along with the subject to personalize them. These two aspects of the process happen in tandem. This process is mirrored by the compelling of acquiescence in each descending path, the weak phase linking. From this we can see that the dialectical degeneration represented by infinite recursion is mirrored within consensus. The product of sublimation represents a decontextualized artifact of sublimation, which must be classified, generalized and personalized. Thus over the boundary of the bubble universe there is a kind of arcing, which reflects the progression of that impersonal artifact to a personalized contextualized impulse. All of this means that the artifact traces historical conflicts, progressing along the development of these conflicts from the ideal to the real in consensus. The consensus shifting which results from infinite recursion sees the affirmation of impulses which are conflictual to the existing consensus. This means that it begins as a minor dispute over what is real, the separation of the bubble universe from the exterior reality, but over time, it cascades into larger narratives of history and historical conflict as it promulgates to the new consensus. From this we can see that the act of creation, which sublimation entails, is always funneled into existing conflicts or fissures in the historical record. Sublimation, although ultimately an act of creation, is corrosive to the status quo and the compromises that people have made over fundamental questions about what is true. That's the end of the podcast for today.